Welcome to Evolution of the Soul series. My name is Lynn Barrette. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and spiritual counselor. And my website is centerfordynamichealing.com. And we are going to be doing kind of a three-part series. This one that we're starting tonight is the first part called Evolution of the Soul. I'll be going over this a little bit later too. We're going to look at reincarnation more closely and karma during this time. So we will go ahead and get started. Let's see. Okay, there we go. All right, so as I said, our starting point today is evolution of the soul. We're going to look at where we have been as souls, where we are now, and where we're going. And so tonight is a very, and I apologize in advance, but it's a very heady theoretical exploration of the evolution of the soul. But as we go, it's important to understand the whole overall picture, because when we talk about reincarnation, we need to have a foundation for why we're reincarnating in the first place, and to be able to see the overall picture. And then when we talk about karma, then that's, that's the next kind of more subtle goings on behind the scenes that we're living in anyway. And the karma is the law that works inside of the reincarnation process. So we're kind of going from this extremely broad understanding and overview of our soul evolution to more specifically the reincarnation, the human reincarnation process, then more specifically within reincarnation, how is karma operating? So that's what we're going to just kind of play with for the next few weeks. In December, no matter where we're at in this process, this three-part process, in December, we're going to stop everything and spend the Sundays in December working with 7 steps for releasing the year, because it's really important, especially this year, I think. Really important for us to work with that. So anyway, so that's where we're going. So a few references, most of these actually you've seen before. So Center for Enlightenment is Jane Elizabeth Hart's organization that is just a wealth of information on evolution of the soul and things, very practical videos and audio and worksheets and self-study lessons that are beautiful, rich teachings that you can explore more. And Discourses by Mara Baba is a great intellectual exercise in evolution of the soul. Ponder on This is another one. Autobiography of a Yogi. These are all my favorites. And I added Tertium Organum by Ouspensky for tonight, not because I've ever read this book, but because there is a chart that came from this book that we're going to be exploring tonight. So I just wanted to put that up there as the reference for it. And the chart is actually what I was apologizing for earlier, but it's awesome. But I definitely nerd out on it, so you'll have to, again, forgive me in advance. I have a 7-step process you can use if you need it. So a few clarifications from the soul evolutionist perspective. So just to kind of give a guideline for how I approach this, I invite you to take what works for you and leave behind the rest. Won't hurt my feelings, but just to give you an understanding of where I'm coming from, because there's a lot of different perspectives out there on reincarnation and what happens with the soul and all of that. So this is very specific. To me, it resonates as beautiful logic, which my idea of universal intelligence and love is very logical, and there's a flow to it, and that just resonates with me. some people have a perspective that is a little bit more random and happenstance, and it just doesn't make sense to me. So it's not anything I would ever teach, but to each his own, right? But just to know, so that you know where we're coming from for tonight. So we have soul evolution, the soul evolution perspective, as per Jane Elizabeth Hart and Center for Enlightenment, and lots of other mystical teachings too, if you look closely enough, says that we have evolved from lesser consciousness to greater consciousness, not the reverse, not back and forth or variations thereof. We never unlearn what we learn as we go from lifetime to lifetime. We may make mistakes and poor choices, but it's not because we didn't know it. It's because we got caught up in the moment and didn't practice what we had learned, right? Which happens, we're human. So, but it's always this, from the lesser consciousness to greater consciousness, always, always, always. Humans are the most evolved life form on Earth, with the exception of those who have reached enlightenment. So I mentioned this one because when I've taught this over the years, I've had people, insist that, whales are more evolved life forms, or dolphins are more evolved life forms because they don't hurt people or they don't hurt each other, and, they have more compassion. So obviously they're more evolved. And they, this takes the stance, this soul evolutionist perspective takes the stance that, yes, dolphins are awesome and, probably, will take that compassion with them because they've experienced that in their soul history. But there are a lot of things that they can't do that humans can do, for better or worse. Their brains aren't evolved, their consciousness isn't evolved enough to incorporate all the things that a human can do. Doesn't make them less valuable. It just, on the on the soul evolution food chain, they're not at the top. So every soul has gone through an evolutionary process. Every soul. I've heard people also say over the years, well, that person has had many lifetimes, but I don't think I have. I think this is my first time here. And then I've heard other people say, yeah, I'm a very old soul. And usually they don't have any idea what they're talking about. So anyway, but what we're talking about is that we've all gone through this evolutionary process, and we will continue to go through this evolutionary process until ad infinitum, because even once we have evolved out of our human form into our fully spiritual form, there's lots of other ways to grow and learn and expand in consciousness. It just goes on and on. So because every soul has gone through an evolutionary process, there's more history in each of us than meets the eye. And if you were with me when we talked about the subconscious in our last spiritual power tool study, then you know that we all have that history that we carry around with us all the time. Now, our main focus that we're really going to spend the most amount of time is the process from moving from human consciousness to our spiritual consciousness, because that's where we're at. That's where all the work is. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go. Feel free to throw out questions anytime. Okay, so basically, until our spiritual form, there are 4 forms of consciousness that we have evolved through. Inanimate consciousness, where things are, like, we are reacted upon. So that includes like plants and rocks and stones and amoebas and, all of that. So they get reacted on and not have the ability to react back. Animal form of consciousness, which is instinctual. We've talked about that in the past too. It's instinct to develop, animals are born with instinct wired in them, so they know how to survive. They know how to get food, they know how to procreate, they know how to take care of their bodies, and they just automatically do that. And then there's the next step is the human consciousness, which is where our emotions to a certain extent and intelligence definitely develops. And then the next step is the spiritual consciousness, divine intuitive consciousness. The interesting part about these different stages, and there are extremely different stages, is that from inanimate consciousness to animal consciousness, our soul was evolved for us. So in other words, we didn't have to think about, okay, well, I've been inanimate, now I think it's time for me to be an animal and find out what that's like. That just automatically happens without our input until we reach human consciousness. And then in our human consciousness, we have that process of reincarnation as we know it, with individual distinct lives from one another that are all connected by our learning process. And then from our human intelligence into our spiritual consciousness, that leap has to be conscious and willing. We are not automatically evolved into our spiritual consciousness. We have to do the work for that. We have a lot of support when we do it, but we have to clear out that subconscious iceberg and release it and let go of our human attachments in order to be free enough to move into that spiritual consciousness. And so there we go. So here comes the chart. So let me tell you about the history of this chart, my history with this chart. So when in one of my first classes that I attended with Jane Elizabeth back a long time ago, 28 years ago, she handed out this chart, which was way more complex, believe it or not, than the one I am about to show you piece by piece. And it was on this 11 by 17 inch sheet of paper that had been photocopied for us all. It was this chart and all these little boxes, and it showed the different forms that we're going to talk about tonight. And she barely spent 5 minutes on this chart, but it was the thing that stood out to me so much. It just gave my brain my intellect, this food to go home and chew on. And I just absorbed that chart when I got home. And I never understood for a long time, because I ended up asking her, like, why didn't you spend more time on that? That is so fascinating. And, it was because, people in her classes have these different perspectives, like I was bringing up a little bit earlier tonight, where, I've never been a rock, I've never been a bird, I've never been an animal, that's not, or maybe next time I'll be a dolphin, or I'll be an eagle soaring through the sky. And it's like, she didn't want to have to deal with, arguing with people about that, because it doesn't really matter, right? I mean, they're going to be a human next time, whether they want to be a dolphin or not, so in this perspective. So, so she didn't want that to be the focus of her teaching, right? She just wanted to throw it out there, let whoever was interested in it take a look more, and then whoever wasn't, that's fine too. But I'm bringing it up because I think it's really beautiful to see the flow of each of these. So how this chart works is, and I've put a reference to it in here, but I also uploaded the full chart on my website, and I'll send it out with our recording probably tomorrow, at some point tomorrow. So this chart has the 4 forms of consciousness in the columns. The first form, which is the inanimate, second form is animal, third form is human, and the fourth form is our spiritual consciousness. And then the very left column lists different aspects of us, and we're going to just do these one by one. There are 8 slides, just FYI, and I'm not going to read every word, I promise. But some of them are more important than others. but it really gives a flow for the evolution in these different areas and how it looks. And it makes a lot of sense too. And there's somebody's posting something in the chat. So let me just look real quick. Could you explain the world on the line? Let me know a little bit more about what you mean by that, if you don't mind. So yeah, just let me know about that. And in the meantime, we'll go ahead and go with this. So the sense of space and time. So in the first form of consciousness, it's the sense of space is one-dimensional. So if it's I don't know, a speck of sand, which does evolve, believe it or not, a speck of sand has a one-dimensional experience of space, and not really so much, you know, like knowing what time it is or anything, but basically it's just like, this is my space, I have my space, but I'm not even really aware of my space. I'm barely aware of my space. So the first form is like microscopic consciousness. So if you think of our consciousness as something that grows, this is like the very, you know, we become an individualized part of God, part of the universe, and we have a tiny bit of consciousness when we come into form. We don't know that we just came from the everything. We have just a tiny bit of consciousness about who we are, let alone where we came from. And then slowly, over eons of time, we get evolved into that second form, which is the animal form. And so there's a sense of two-dimensional space. I see where you're going with the world on a plane, and you know, so like my dog gets his sense of space, but he only has a limited sense of his own movement and his own ability to understand time for sure. Like he knows, he's got a pretty good routine. He knows when it's time to eat. He knows when it's time to go outside. He knows when it's time to wake up. He knows that he can't come into my bedroom in the morning until he sees me actually eyes open and out of bed. Then he runs in because he knows that's fine, but he doesn't think of like, gee, well, let me give her another 10 minutes. He just has different cues for that. So he doesn't have a sense of time. Okay, so then our third form, we have a three-dimensional sense of space. We understand time. We can understand past, present, and future, whereas my dog just understands the present. What is the next, you know, what's the present moment thing on our daily routine? And that's all he has with him. Then in our fourth form, that spiritual consciousness, there is a spatial sense of time and beyond time. You know, time is a physical reality. You know, it's not a spiritual reality, it's a physical reality. So to be able to move through time is a spatial goings on that we will never understand with our intellect. We will only understand that when we get there. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and go on to the next one. Sorry, this is really heady, but it's so exciting to me. Okay, so psychology, this is where it gets really exciting. So in the first form, psychologically, there is, so the psychology is very limited, of course. So I'm just going to kind of skip ahead on this one because that's a lot to go into. So let me go on to the second form. So once the speck of dust, just as an example, the leaf, the plant becomes an animal consciousness, the second form of consciousness, then the perception changes. There's the expression of sensations where a plant, you know, even though we can actually measure when a plant is feeling something, you know, because it has consciousness, and there's been studies that have shown that, but it can't articulate that Whereas my dog, if I step on his paw, he can shout out to me, or if he needs to go outside, he can scratch at the door, and I've got some bells on there that he pats a little bit, and he knows how to communicate in that level. Our favorite dolphins know how to communicate back and forth. There's a language. You know, there's been a lot of studies with that. There's communication back and forth, but it's still in a limited arena that communication takes place. It's for limited reasons. It's, you know, even if it's for playfulness, like dolphins love playing, it's still in an arena that is limited, versus in our human form, that third form, we can form concepts and words and judgments and logic and different reasoning and speech, and we can write books. You know, there's a lot more that we can do. We can make metaphors that say one thing and mean something else. You know, animals don't have that kind of logic. And then our spiritual form, there's a whole new sense of self, higher emotions. There's still emotion, you know, and I like to use the example of Jesus overturning the tables in the temple. You know, it's like we could say that Jesus had an anger problem, right? Like, why would he do that? That's kind of rude. But there was a purpose to that. He was in a state of being within himself where he was breaking up some old thought forms and had to clear things out to stir things up for people and make people realize, you know, oh my gosh, we were doing this. We're selling these things to people who really can't afford it, and we're telling them they have to in order to come into this temple. And Jesus was saying, are you crazy? Stop it. That is awful. Stop it. And it needed to. It's like this big, I call it Shiva energy. Shiva is the Hindu god of destruction, right? And we have to have an energy like that to destroy some of our old thought forms in that iceberg. If you think it's like those thought forms of ice pellets in our consciousness, and we have to have that energy and develop that energy within us that comes in and breaks up those thought forms and says, no, I can't think this way. That is not true about myself. I'm okay. And that's our job. All right. So higher emotions, expansion of concepts, that is an understatement of, you know, like there are goings on that we have no idea are happening. Like, you know, between lifetimes, there are enlightened beings whose job it is to help us figure out, you know, hey, this is what went on this last lifetime. Let's now take all that you've learned, all that you've grown through, and not just this last time, but, you know, the last 500 lifetimes, and take that information and see what's next for you and what you want to express, what you want to wake up to, what you want to heal. And so there's a group of beings that help us figure out what our next lifetime is going to be. So we can't even conceptualize that with our human mind. We don't know how to access that information. We don't know how to put it together, you know, because you think about it, it's that it wouldn't just be my lifetime that we're getting set up, you know, they would help get set up, but all the people that would be in my next lifetime, those people have to be all set up too. So you can imagine there's this exponential logic and planning that has to go on in order for one person to come into incarnation. And that seems like an organizational nightmare to us, but when you're beyond time and space, and you know, we'll see, you have logic and access to information and understanding and energy and force, there's a lot you can do in a short period of time. So anyway, so it's pretty amazing. And again, our main focus is us moving from that third form, moving ourselves from that third form into that fourth form eventually. So, all right, so logic, this one is always fascinating to me. So in the first form, there's really an absence of thinking. So or confused thinking, like a plant. I remember reading a study, this was years ago, so I may be quoting it a little bit inaccurately, but I remember reading that they put electrodes or something to measure a plant's response based on what was happening in front of it. So when, when things, when it was being watered and the leaves were being wiped, then it had a certain kind of reading. But when other leaves, not even from that same plant, but when other leaves were being chopped in front of it, it had a whole different reaction. We would call it fear probably, but we don't really know what it was feeling. But it was definitely different from the soothing, wiping off the leaves and watering that was happening before. So there's a little bit of thinking there, but it's not, there's not logic. So there's no way to do anything with any kind of very rudimentary thinking that's taking place. So in the second form, this is the back to my dog. So this is this, that is that, is very black and white. This is not that. So he knows what my bedroom is and where he's not allowed at night. He makes a lot of noise, that's why. And so, he knows this is not where I can be at night. That is where I can be at night. And there's not a lot of, he's not trying to reason with me. Like, maybe if I just am a little farther away, or maybe if I promise to be quiet. There's none of that going on. It's like, nope, black and white. She doesn't want me in here. If I try, she's going to kick me out. So I might as well just stay out. And he's really good about that. But he's good at being trained. And that's it. In the third form, our human consciousness, we can say A is A. We know that A is not A, and everything is either A or not A. So it's very dualistic, black and white thinking, the logic of antithesis. So there's a thesis and there's an antithesis, and we can see that a lot in our world right now, in our country especially right now, with that dualistic thinking where either this is right or this is right. And so interestingly, let's take that into that spiritual perception, that spiritual consciousness, and see that A is both A and not A. A is both A and not A. So in our spiritual consciousness, from that expanded view and expanded understanding and the detachment that needs to happen from our human emotion and perceptions through that emotion, then we can see, okay, yeah, this is going on in the world. And who can we say who is right? There's a master plan. So we know what direction we want to be moving into, but it isn't about right and wrong. It's about, this is what's happening. There's karma that's getting paid off. There's karma that's due. And then there's free will. And what are the people going to do with their free will during this turmoil? And, it's really a big test for us as humanity, to see what are we going to do with that. But it isn't about right and wrong in the way that we look at it in our human sense, where, hey, if this is right, then all of that is wrong. There's a whole different perspective, and we'll learn more about that when we're talking about karma down the road, because karma, the real understanding of karma will turn our understanding of right and wrong on its head, and it has to, right? Or we'll never heal, never grow. So stay tuned. Okay, forms of action. So the first form is reflex, it's unconscious, it's responding to whatever's going on the outside. Second form, that animal consciousness, is instinct, emotion. So, I think we give our animals a lot of credit. I always say my dog is just like, he's going to be a human in his next life because he's so clever and smart, and which is totally frustrating sometimes, but it's also really wonderful to see. And but he, but he still has to, he's still not there. So he's got these emotions, but we can't have a conversation. He doesn't know who he's going to vote for. He can't even vote, but he wouldn't know who he's going to vote for if he could vote, right? So, that kind of action, that intellectual action, he doesn't have. So in our human consciousness, we have actions that are performed with thought and pre-thought, and sometimes no thought at all. And we understand that there are consequences for our actions. We may not think about them ahead of time, but we know that we can see that, oh, I did this, I stayed up too late, and so now I'm tired. My dog can't really see that. He can be up late if I'm up late, and then he goes to sleep, and he may not have any idea that why he's so tired the next day. He might not even think about being tired the next day. He just sleeps, because he doesn't have that self-reflection consciousness ability yet. So, so in our third form, we can react to what's happening in the world more. We have more possibilities for that interaction with the world than my dog does. And then in our fourth form, our spiritual consciousness, it's the starting of conscious action. And I want to put in here too that we learn how to put causes in that that will shift things in ways we wouldn't have been able to just in our human form. I'm trying to think of an example of that. I guess the example that comes up is inception, but that's too complicated right now to explain why I'm thinking of that one. But let me think. I had an experience, and this gets kind of into karma one time. I had an experience early on when I was first learning from Jane Elizabeth and talking with her, and I was having this discord with somebody I was working with, volunteering with, and I was talking to Jane about it, and I said, I like this person, but they don't like me, and I don't understand why. It's like I feel like they're doing something to kind of sabotage any kind of interaction we have. And she said, you know what? Something happened in another lifetime. You don't have to know what it is right now. Something happened in another lifetime, and they want you to forgive them. I'm like, no, they want you to apologize. That's what it was. They needed to hear an apology from me, but there wasn't anything that I was doing to apologize for. And she's like, just make something up. I'm like, okay. So we had some scheduling difficulties. So I went to this person and I said, I am very sorry that it's been so hard to schedule with me. I'm really sorry. It means a lot to me that we have time together and to get our work done. And I'm very sorry that I've been so difficult to be in contact with. And this person looked at me, and there was something that shifted in them, that their whole demeanor was different with me from that point forward. They seemed more relaxed, and things flowed better. Now, I would not have known that to do that myself. It was something that Jane Elizabeth was able to see and advise me on, but it was a cause. My apology put a cause in that allowed her soul to feel compensated for whatever I had done in another lifetime to upset her, and our whole relationship shifted. So that's an example of putting a cause in. That's a different kind of action that we only get access to that once we've purified our human biases. If I had not had that information, we would have just gone on kind of like struggling to get things done. It probably probably if I didn't have that connection of Jane Elizabeth to help me see something that I wasn't able to see, nobody would have known the difference. We would have both gone along as humans, not knowing what was needed there, and then maybe have to come back in another lifetime and figure it out. But because Jane Elizabeth was able to see that and say, hey, this is what you need to do. I don't care what you apologize to her for. It's not going to matter what you apologize for. She just needs to hear it. Like, okay, so I made something up, and well, is it something that I could be authentically say to her? And it just shifted everything totally. So that's what, that's a different kind of action that we don't have access to until we get there. All right, so morals, our sense of morality shifts also. So in our first form, those poor little guys, they just be, plants grow. They don't really have anything morally to look forward to one way or the other. Then the animal form, there's the beginnings of connection, family, tribal instincts, having that, instinct to procreate and all of that evolution, but having the starting of groupthink, the starting of, hey, we're all in this together and we have to be here for each other. And that's where we find, dolphins being so beautiful to watch, or elephants and grieving for their loved ones who die and having a special burial place. There's a connection to the group. And then in our human form, we have, again, that division into good and evil. So we have these concepts that we create that say this is good and this is bad. Some of it is coming from our animal existence. And, we have that sense of groups. We have this kind of instinctive knowing at a basic level what's right and what's wrong. But we also have our minds that are out for themselves most of the time. So we also have that's in the mix also. So morality becomes more of, it starts as that basic instinct, but it has to become more of a choice as we grow in humanity. And then in our spiritual consciousness, there's the new conscious. There's not, morality isn't a question because there's a connection with the all. So we know that we are connected. So we know that, Jane Elizabeth has said, you are my body. You're my body. We're all one. So I don't see you as separate from me. So if you need support, I need support, and I need to support you because you're part of me, and that whole, not just the concept of oneness, but the whole reality of oneness. If we think of that iceberg melting completely, we are all the ocean, and we have our different vibration. We have our different sound, we have our different flavor as an individualized soul, but we can be, remember, in that fourth dimensional logic, we can be both, A can be A, but A can also not be A. So we can be one, and we also can be individual, and it's the same. So there's a realization of that self as an independent unit, as its own vibration. Our soul has its own vibration, its own sound, its own flavor, but there's also a connection of oneness as well. All right. And forms of consciousness. So in that first form, again, it's potential consciousness. It's so minute that it's there, but it's latent, it's asleep. It's about as asleep as it could possibly be and still be in manifest form. Then second form of consciousness is simple. My dog knows that that he hurts when he does, but he can't say, my paw is hurting. He just knows that his paw is hurting and will lick it or gnaw at it, or whatever he needs to do to react to that, but he can't see himself as an individualized self outside of what he's experiencing. So it's his consciousness is reflected reflected by what's happening to him or happening around him. And very, very passive consciousness. In our third form, we have the ability to think of our state of consciousness, the division of I, what is me and what is not me. In psychology, we know that separation starts around the age of 3, where we become aware of ourselves outside of our mothers or fathers or caregivers, whoever is our primary caregiver. We just start at about 3 years old, start to go, okay, so I am this separate self. That's why 4-year-olds are so great at lying, because they suddenly learn, like, I am not you. I wonder what happens if I say this. I know it's not true, but I just want to see what happens. And, just beginning to develop its sense of self. And of course, we want to teach that 4-year-old not to do that, but it's not doing, he or she's not doing that out of a maliciousness. It's just out of like experimenting. Like, I'm not an appendage to my parent. Who am I? Let me try some of these things out. And it's that experimentation all the way through. I don't know. I'm still experimenting with things. So I don't know. I don't know if that ever ends, but anyway, we have a sense of what is us and what is not us. Now, the exception is personality disorders, right, which is a whole different class and area, where that ability at 3 years old that is supposed to start to develop, to see ourselves as separate from what's going on in our world, doesn't develop. And so then a person is kind of stuck thinking that their okayness is based on whatever is happening around them, rather than knowing that they can find that okayness within themselves. Anyway, I didn't mean to talk about that, but I did. So, so again, this is the moment in this third form. Further evolution can only be conscious. We're not evolving into our spiritual consciousness by proxy or by a tap on the forehead, or, we have to do the work to clear ourselves and detach from our humanness. And it takes a long time, and it's a process. And that's really what we're talking about when we talked about the spiritual power tools. Those are all tools to help detach from our emotions, which is part of moving from the third form into the fourth form, to not be entangled with our emotions. And, and that's a very long process to disentangle ourselves and be in that higher perspective that can see, okay, here's what's going on, but I don't have to react to that. I can be here and I can just kind of look and see. Jane Elizabeth was there for me when she saw, I was telling her about this coworker, I don't know if it's a volunteer, co-volunteer, who I was having challenges with, and she could see there wasn't a right or wrong. It was a balancing of energy, right? And so I could have chosen to not apologize. It was really awkward for me to go apologize for nothing, but, or for something that she was doing too. So I shouldn't have to apologize, because, I'm right and she's not, and, but she was able to see that. And I had then had the choice to go do that or not do it, but I had to make that choice. Nobody was going to do that for me. And I had free will. I could have not done it and just struggled with her for the rest of the time I lived there. But instead, I just said, okay, I want to wake up. I want to work this out. And it was just a really good example of, doing something, being more conscious about something that is going to help things move forward. And it was a blessing to her as much as it was a blessing for me to let that shift take place. So the fourth form of consciousness is the beginning of self-consciousness. And usually we capitalize that S, right? That it's our real self. It's our authentic soul, I want to say, where our human personality has gone by the wayside, and we have become that soul that is conscious of its unity. It's conscious of more than the amygdala, the emotions that the amygdala is throwing out. Ecstatic states are part of that, but ecstatic states are not the be all and end all. Like, ecstatic states are just an experience, like enjoying a good meal or something. And usually with ecstatic states, there's a reason for that. You know, maybe we're being uplifted so we can gather more information, like in meditation, but at an even higher capacity, or we feel kind of mellow and just no goings on inside at all, and we're being downloaded because we're being downloaded with something. So there's a purpose to those ecstatic states, and they're not the goal. They're not, they just happen along the way. They're not the goal. It's part of the transition into cosmic consciousness. All right, if you've ever read, I don't know why you would do this, but I'm kind of a nerd this way too. But if you've ever read Dark Night of the Soul by St. John of the Cross, and you know, usually there's some translations that go and the interpretations that go with it. His process of becoming enlightened had these ups and downs, and he called that process the Dark Night of the Soul. But it wasn't just going through a hard time externally. You know, a lot of times people will use that, you know, I'm going through the dark night of the soul, and it's this external challenge that they're struggling through. And that's great to be able to work through an outer situation, but that is karma. That's just working out karma. And we all have to do that, whether we're conscious of it or not. We're all doing that. But dark night of the soul is that internal process of purging ourselves from the opposite, from the ups and downs. And his story is about, you know, one day he is just like so in ecstasy, and he can't even move. He can't think. He can't see anything. Like, everything is glowing all around. He can barely see. And 2 days later, he feels like the worst creature on the planet. He feels so disgusted with himself and so awful. And it's just, you know, what was happening is that his iceberg was getting purged. It was getting purged, and he was having to watch it. He was having to be conscious of it and participate in that process of freeing himself from the burden of his past, right? We have so many, we're going to talk about this a lot. We have so many judgments of ourselves and quite honestly, hatred for ourselves that we've carried with us from lifetime to a lifetime. And, you know, sometimes it's like, well, no, the worst hatred we could carry is how we feel about somebody else. Believe me, it is not the worst. The worst, most difficult part is what we carry against ourselves. And so that's what part of what he was purging. So anyway, so I've totally lost why I started in on that, but it's a fascinating process to read about. You know, another really good book too is called Mysticism by Evelyn Underhill. And that's a really heady book also, but there's some parts of it where it's talking about, she's writing about purification. That is that process. It's that process of going through this cleansing of old thought forms that keep us on the law of karma, that keep us reincarnating because we have unfinished business. It's consciously turning within and saying, okay, I'm ready to finish this business. Just help me finish this business so that I can be beyond all this. And we think we are beyond all this, and then we don't have to deal with humanity anymore. But we get beyond it, and we deal with humanity differently. We don't take things so personally. We can watch something as fascinating as what's going on in our country and world right now and do our part, but have no polls from relatives or neighbors or Facebook friends or whatever. You know, we have, you know, we can just say, wow, I don't know how this is going to turn out, but it's karma in action, and it's been building for a couple hundred years at least. So let's just sit back and watch and what happens, and let's do our part to maintain our love and compassion and firmness. You know, that's part of it too. But we're not blinded by how we feel about what's going on in the world. All right, so we haven't even done this one. Forms of knowledge. So the first form, unconscious, again, you know, just there, making our rooms look nice with plantage and such, seashells and different things like that. So it's adaptable, you know, so it kind of is changed by what's happening on the outside versus creating any kind of changes. Second form, that animal form, is the beginning of attention, beginning of observation. You know, it's the ability of my dog to come to expect his routine every day, when he's let out, when he's fed, when he sleeps, and, you know, where I'm at during the day, and if he, you know, needs to follow me around, or if he's okay laying somewhere else. You know, it's that that observation, accumulation of instinct, the recognition that everything sensed is real. So, you know, he knows if I step on his foot, that's real. It's not just his imagination. It's not him making things up. So it's very concrete that way. If the senses are developing, and you know, and so there's this whole, like, my dog, let's say, has probably, no doubt, not probably, but no doubt, been through a lot of animal lifetimes before he came into this incarnation. And, you know, if you have a pet or a plant or anything that you take care of, or kid, anything you take care of, it's our job to help them be as conscious as possible. You know, so even with our plants, talking to them, and with the dog, I tell him every now and then, you know, I know you're going to be a human next time, and I just want you to be a good one, because you're just going to be one step from being an animal. So you have a long time before you're going to develop your control over your animal instinct. And you're going to have some lifetimes before you're, you know, maybe you're smart now and you can do something with that, but you've got a long road to develop the kind of intelligence you're going to have to develop to move into your spiritual self, you know. But hey, that's so cool. I'm so honored to be part of your little process, because I know that you're just going to get pushed into your human form next time, because what do you have left to learn? You're too damn smart as it is. Sorry. Anyway, so moving right along here. But yeah, the failure to discriminate between that which is illusion and that which is real. I think one of our Sunday nights, I showed a picture of my boyfriend holding a picture of my dog up to him. He kind of sniffed it, and, you know, didn't know if that was a real dog looking back at him or not at first. So, you know, that process is developing as well. So in our human form of knowledge, we experience, we experiment. So we categorize our knowledge: religion, philosophy, politics, science, art. You know, we have these different realms that we understand and again can categorize. And that's part of that ability to have that extensive knowledge and capacity to compartmentalize and to come up with concepts and books and, you know, different things, is that which separates us from, well, I mean, all these things separate us, right, from our animal kingdom friends. But that's part of it too. You know, dolphins can't sit around writing books of poetry. Maybe they can squeak poetry to each other. Maybe they do, but they can't write it down because they just have flippers. So anyway, just to kind of back that up a little bit more. And then our spiritual form, our knowledge, they call it here mystic knowledge, right? There's a new sensation of time, a sensation of infinity, the sensation of the unreality of the phenomenal visible world. So, so the things that we have learned are true because of our senses from our spiritual self, that spiritual consciousness, we can see that that only exists so that we can get to this place, this spiritual sense where we don't need that sensory illusion anymore, because that's just put in place for the purpose of evolving souls. It's not for any other reason. So there's that understanding of that. It's why there are several enlightened people out there who've been able to turn one material into another, or to materialize something. Sai Baba from India would pass out ash, but he would just materialize it in his hand, and he would put it on people's forehead, or he would put it in their hands, and he would materialize all sorts of things. And so, because he knew the law of substance, right, which is that substance, my blanket that's on my chair with me is made up of atoms that are vibrating at a rate that when it's all put together, it creates a blanket, but it's still just atoms, which are powered by energy. And so, people like Sai Baba, Jesus turning water into wine, they just understood the energy of the thing, and were able to, have mastered being able to change that into something different, because they understood that the material stuff that we see that we think is so real is not. It's just an illusion put together for a reason, though, for a reason. And I'm just going to throw out here, I've grown up around like a lot of new thought movement people, and one thing that I came across, one concept that I came across over and over and over again was, it's just all an illusion. Everything's an illusion. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to worry. And people would just kind of go along and believe that they didn't have to engage in their lives because it's all just an illusion. And yeah, it's all just an illusion, but this illusion is here for a reason. And our engagement with it and understanding ourselves, understanding how we're working in the universe, eventually understanding that there's karma involved in what we're doing. Everything around us is karmically created. It has been karmically created, so it belongs to us. So we are in charge of taking care of it. It's our responsibility to take care of it, whether we release it or manage it or create something new with it. It still belongs to us for as long as it's in our lives. So there's a responsibility we have in the illusion, plus it's there so that we wake up. It's there to not be happy all the time, so that we can grow and we can learn and we can say, okay, well, I have been behaving like this for a period of time, and you know what? I don't like it, and it's not working for me. It's not working for whoever it's affecting in my life, and I want to change that. I want to change that because I don't want to create any more karma. I want to change that because it's a burden to me. It's messing with my emotions in a way that doesn't feel good. I don't feel free. I feel trapped by whatever triggers those emotions. And I want to free myself from those things that trigger me, but it's not releasing, it's not running away from them on the outside. It's healing them on the inside, where that has to take place. So this illusion is very important to our waking up. And we do have to wake up to the fact that it's an illusion, but we won't do that until we've used the illusion to do what it's there to do. Okay. All right. Oh, I can't believe these charts just go on and on. This is on all one 3-page PDF form. I'll show you where it is on my website. I did a screenshot, so we'll be able to see it. All right, so the different kind of beings in each of these forms. The first form is the lower animal cells of the tissues and organs of the body. So we have our soul consciousness, but each of our cells have their own consciousness too. And that's why, you know, maybe you've heard, like, if you're not feeling good or you have a pain somewhere, you talk to that part of your body. And, you know, I do brain spotting with body parts sometimes that are not working or feeling so well, just to find out what's going on. What do we need to do to harmonize these cells so that they're working together? I'm holding my shoulder because my shoulder's been hurting, you know, and what do we need to do to work with that? But each of those cells is its own consciousness, but still one-dimensional, vegetative or semi-vegetative life. All right, so the second form is the higher animal. Our bodies are second form because they do work together. They respond to what's happening. We have senses that respond. You know, if the sun is too bright, we react. If the temperature is too cold, we get goosebumps, you know, that kind of thing. So our bodies themselves are two-dimensional beings, aside from the soul that we are, the individualized human being soul that we are, that inhabits the body. All right, so third form is our human self, our three-dimensional being. Outwardly, we're three-dimensional on the outside, where we can move in time and space, but inwardly, we're dual. We have a duality going on within us, where, you know, we can think opposing thoughts at the same time and believe they're true depending on what we're thinking in the moment. I was gonna make a political comment, but I won't. But anyway, you know, one minute we may be thinking, gosh, I'm really angry with this person, and, you know, I can't believe she's doing this, and, you know, like, just behaving so badly. And the next minute we might be thinking, you know, I really should have more compassion and understanding, and I really understand where she's coming from. And then believing that's true. And then 5 minutes later, being back on the other side. So we have this duality, or we feel confident and wonderful about our abilities and our looks and our accomplishments and all of this. And then the next minute we feel alone and not really worthy of anybody's time or anything, you know. So we have these dualities, and those are the dualities that we're purifying ourselves from, so that we can see, like, hey, I know why I feel one way one time and then another way another time. You know, I've got these consciousnesses from other lifetimes that are in me battling this back and forth. So, so it says here, the soul is the battlefield of the spirit and the flesh. So our soul is that go-between between knowing our oneness and also understanding that we've got a lot of stuff to work through. And, you know, so if we're not conscious of that, we're just acting that out. And that's what we've done for many, many lifetimes. All of us have been reactionary and unconscious for many, many lifetimes. Where we are sitting right now, where you are sitting right now today in your life, is the most conscious you have ever, ever, ever been. And, you know, there's a joke for, you know, somebody who said, well, I don't really believe in reincarnation. And the other person says, yeah, you probably didn't believe it in your last lifetime either. So, you know, so we are definitely more conscious now than we were in our last life. And, you know, because we've had that growth of consciousness, we are the most conscious we've ever been. So anyway, yeah, lost my train of thought again. But I get so excited about it. What can I say? So in the fourth form of being, we're transitioning into a new type. Just as the animal consciousness is distinct and different from the human consciousness, so our spiritual consciousness is very, very different expression of who we are than our human mind. I want to say our human consciousness, because it really is, you know, here's our human consciousness, and then we take that leap into our spiritual consciousness, which isn't a total leap. There's a lot of, kind of straddling back and forth for a long time. Then making the leap into our spiritual consciousness is we're a different being. That's why I like the concept of evolution of the soul, because we evolve and we are using our brains in a different way. We are using emotions in a different way. We are using we've developed our sense of intuition, just like intelligence, right? Hopefully, I would think that my intelligence is a little bit different than my dog's intelligence. But once he's human, he's going to be able to develop intelligence too. But until then, his intelligence will never be like mine for him in his doggy lifetime. So that difference in intellect is that much of a jump between our human self and our spiritual self. We develop our intuition. Our intuition becomes our sensory input. Our intuition takes information through our senses, because we still have bodies, takes information through our senses, but it interprets it through intuition rather than intellect. And that's a whole different ball game, because we're doing different things with that information. We're not just saying, okay, well, this person, I don't know what's going on, but they're not really that nice to me. And I feel like every time we get together, they're kind of sabotaging it. And, what the heck, But if I had been at that time in my spiritual consciousness, I would be able to see, I'd be able to go, okay, so I'm seeing this. Now, what's really going on here? Oh, she's mad at me. Okay, why is she mad at me? Did I do anything recently? No. So let's go back a little farther, and I probably wouldn't even have to think about it that much. But, there's an energy here, and she's mad at me about something. So let me just apologize about something. And that's going to, let's see, maybe it won't. She has free will, but, maybe that will help shift this a little bit, So it's a whole different being. It is really, we become a whole different being. All right, so I had something pop up in our chat here. So let me take a breath and do that. Maybe next time we can discuss how do you let go of anger from certain people, newscasters, entertainers, etc. Oh my gosh, we should probably wait until November 15th to discuss that, right? But all these tools will help us, that we're going to be talking about over the weeks, will help us with that, because it's really about learning how to master our human self. And we have to do that to a certain point, even before our past lives are going to surface as much as they'll need to eventually for us to move into that spiritual consciousness. So all of these tools, yes, all of these tools will help that, because we have to. And when we talk about karma, just to give you a little sneak peek, the disconcerting part is that even though we're awesome people in this lifetime, like we all are, we have not always been awesome people. That was actually another misconception that came up in a class one time. This woman came up, I don't know if she said it during class, or I think it was during class, not after class. And she said, no, I just thought if you're a good person, you've just always been a good person in all your lifetimes. And if you're a bad person, it's because you've always been bad. I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish that were true, because I would not have the karma to deal with that I have, because I would have always been awesome and not unawesome, like I have many memories of being unawesome, but that's it, how do we learn? How does anybody learn? We make mistakes. And so we've had hundreds of lifetimes to make lots and lots of mistakes. And then we judge ourselves for those mistakes. And then we try to make up for them by doing the opposite of the thing that we did before, and on. And it just makes this giant ball or iceberg, right? This giant iceberg of learning opportunities that we've accumulated, and we have to work through them. So what happened, and this is, again, jumping ahead a lot, but what happened for me when I started seeing my past lives, and, not the Cleopatra lifetimes, like everybody talks about, but the really gritty, awful ones, is that how can I really judge anybody else? Like maybe I have my opinions or maybe I have whatever, but how can I really condemn any other person on the planet when I've walked through that particular state of consciousness that they're walking through now? Maybe for me, it was a few lifetimes ago instead of my current one, but I've still had to walk through it. And we all have, because we have all gone through these stages. We've all had different experiences, but we've all made mistakes, you know, in learning processes, you know, mistakes like a kid makes mistakes, right? A kid makes mistakes because they're just trying to learn. And that's how we've been too. We've been children on this process, learning and falling down and having to get up and having to figure out, how do I do this differently? And, you know, every lifetime has added to that learning. And it's also, we've also just accumulated a lot of energy that we've held on to that we have to let go of. So there's both in that iceberg, both the difficulties, but also the brilliance that we've accumulated on the way too. So being able to forgive somebody else, like, hey, I've been a person like that, and usually the more they trigger me, this is true for all of us, the more they trigger me, the more I've been like that in some other lifetime. So I might as well forgive them, because really forgiving them, I'm forgiving myself. And it's worth it, because who wants to carry that around? Who wants to let some guy on the news, you know, hit us and, you know, ruin our day? No, thank you. I want to be in charge of me. I want to be the one that says how I feel, not somebody or some situation otherwise. Okay. So yeah, so that fourth form of being is the victory of consciousness. I love it. We by then we have mastered consciousness enough. We know our oneness, and so the things that we're working on, once we're on the other side of that human form and we're fully in that fourth state of consciousness, we have other things that we're learning, but we're learning in a way that we're not getting entangled by things. We're just learning and experiencing and serving in a whole different capacity than otherwise. So the beginnings of personal immortality. Let me just address that, because that's kind of interesting too. Let me check my watch. Oh my gosh, I'm way over time. We'll stop after this and continue next week. But so once we are fully in our consciousness and we've cleared out our subconscious, which stores our karma, we've cleared all of that out as much as we need to in order to move, because some of it is just forgiven with us. But we still have to do our part for most of it. Then we are never unconscious again. We never are an unconscious human again. And there have been, you know, in Autobiography of a Yogi, Yogananda talks about Lahiri Mahasaya, if I'm saying that right, or close enough, was born, and he lived his life as a businessman in India for a long time until his teacher found him and brought him kind of away from the goings on of his world. And Lahiri Mahasaya had done his spiritual work in another lifetime. So then his teacher was able to tap him on the forehead and help him remember who he was, because he was here to take care of other things before he was to be on his spiritual path and awakening. So he came back in his human form to be asleep for a while, but not totally asleep, just to sleep long enough that he could do what he needed to do. And then he had some extra karma to work off, and then he was able to come into his fullness more than ever. So it's a fascinating book. It's really fun to read too, if you want to know more about that kind of thing. Okay, so I actually have let me stop my screen share here. I actually have a meeting to go to next. So I am going to say goodbye for now. I am sorry that we were not able to get our meditation in, but I